The summer sun hit harder that day, burning the sand until it almost shimmered like glass. I remember walking toward the beach with no intention of being noticed, just another body among hundreds chasing waves and warmth. But my eyes kept drifting to the Lifeguard tower. There he was, sitting high above us all, sunglasses hiding his gaze yet somehow making him feel even more untouchable. His skin glowed under the sun, his shoulders broad, posture strong, the kind of presence that made you feel small but safe at the same time. I didn't even know his name, but something about him made my heart beat differently. I told myself not to stare, but I did anyway, pretending to watch the ocean, sneaking glances upward. Each time, I felt something tighten in my chest, something unfamiliar but undeniable. That tower wasn't just a seat, it was a throne, and he was the king of the beach. The sound of whistles, kids laughing, and waves crashing blended together, but I only heard the sound of my own pulse rushing in my ears. I sat close enough to the tower that I could feel his presence without ever daring to speak. My body wanted me to stand, to climb those steps, to find some excuse to say something, anything, but my fear kept me anchored. I was terrified of rejection, terrified that maybe the warmth in my chest was just mine alone, foolish and one-sided. And yet, when the sun shifted, I caught the smallest tilt of his head, like he was looking straight at me through those dark glasses. My throat tightened. Did he really notice me? Or was my mind desperate for hope? An hour passed, maybe more. I lost track of time because I kept waiting for something to happen, some miracle to pull us together. And then, as if fate had listened, he blew the whistle and climbed down the tower with a confidence that felt larger than life. His steps were slow, deliberate, almost teasing, and the crowd seemed to part around him. My chest felt like it would explode when he stopped not far from where I sat. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He bent down to pick up a stray volleyball that had rolled close to my towel, and our eyes finally met without a shield between us. His glasses hung from the collar of his shirt now, his gaze open, piercing, and, God, soft at the same time. "Hey, you okay here?" he asked, voice smooth, deeper than I imagined. Simple words, but they carried weight. I nodded too quickly, probably looked ridiculous, but my lips wouldn't form proper sentences. He smiled, just enough to melt the air between us. He handed the ball back to the kids and turned as if to leave, but he didn't. He looked back at me once more, as if he had questions he wasn't sure how to ask yet. That look made my heart ache in the most beautiful way. The rest of the day felt different. I walked into the water to cool off, but all I could think about was that tiny exchange, the way his eyes had lingered on mine. When I came back, he was already up in the tower again, but this time I didn't just sneak glances. I looked directly at him, and I swear he was watching me too. We didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't make it obvious, but in that silent connection, something was born. Something dangerous, thrilling, and fragile. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in pink and orange, the beach emptied slowly. I packed my bag with shaky hands, knowing I couldn't leave without acknowledging the spark that had set my entire day on fire. I looked back one last time, and there he was, leaning casually on the rail of the tower, the wind ruffling his hair. He didn't look away this time. He nodded at me, small, subtle, but enough to send a current straight through me. That nod wasn't casual. It was a promise. A beginning. And in that moment, I knew my life had just shifted forever, even if I didn't yet understand how. That night I couldn't sleep. The ceiling above me felt too quiet, the fan too loud, and my thoughts too restless. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him again, sitting high in that tower, the sun burning behind his shoulders, his eyes locking onto mine like he knew something I didn't. It wasn't just attraction, it was something heavier, something that pulled at me like the tide itself. I kept replaying that moment when he walked down, when he asked if I was okay, and that small smile that looked like it was meant only for me. My chest wouldn't stop fluttering, and yet, underneath it, there was fear. Fear of being wrong. Fear that maybe I was just imagining the way he looked back at me. But then again, why did he hesitate? Why did he turn his head twice? It felt real, and real was dangerous. The next morning, I forced myself back to the beach earlier than usual. The sand was still damp, the air still carrying the cool bite of dawn, but my body was alive with nerves. When I saw the tower again, my stomach dropped. He was already there, sitting casually as if the world belonged to him. The ocean was his kingdom, and he was watching over it with quiet power. I sat down in the same spot as yesterday, feeling both foolish and brave at once. Part of me wanted him to notice, part of me feared he wouldn't. Time stretched painfully, the waves crashing rhythmically, my heart beating too fast for my own comfort. Eventually, he looked down. Not just a glance this time, but a full, deliberate look. His gaze held mine for longer than it should have, long enough that I forgot to breathe. He leaned down over the rail of the tower, resting his arm casually, as if we had known each other longer than a single day. My face heated, and I looked away, trying to appear calm, but inside I was chaos. Minutes passed before I dared to look back, and when I did, he was still watching, still fixed on me. That steady attention wasn't an accident. Something was happening here, something I couldn't deny anymore. The hours drifted by, the sun rising higher, families filling the beach, laughter mixing with the crash of the surf. I tried to distract myself by swimming, by walking along the shoreline, but my body kept drifting back toward him. No matter where I moved, I felt tethered to that tower. And then it happened again, he came down. This time, there was no volleyball, no excuse. He walked straight toward me, slow, confident, his steps leaving deep prints in the sand. I froze, my mind racing with every possible outcome. When he reached me, he didn't stand above me, he sat down on the edge of my towel, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his skin radiating in the sun. "You came back," he said, voice calm, but carrying something unspoken underneath. "Yeah," I managed, my throat dry, my voice almost breaking. "It's peaceful here." He smiled, not the practiced smile of someone used to attention, but something softer, something almost shy. It surprised me. His reputation on the beach was larger than life, the strong lifeguard everyone respected, but sitting here beside me, he felt human. He leaned back on his hands, tilting his head toward the waves, his profile sharp against the horizon. I couldn't stop looking at him. Every small movement, every breath, every word, it all pulled me closer without him even trying. "What's your name?" he asked finally, turning to me with eyes that felt like they could see right through the defenses I had built around myself. I told him, the sound of it trembling in the air. He repeated it, slow, letting it roll off his tongue like he wanted to memorize it. Then he told me his, and just hearing it made my heart skip. It wasn't just a name, It was the beginning of something I wasn't prepared for. We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but filled with everything neither of us knew how to say yet. At some point, he leaned closer, his voice low. "I've seen you before, you know. You come here a lot." I froze, the confession striking me harder than I expected. He had noticed me, all those times I thought I was invisible, all those moments I thought I was just another face in the sand. The idea that he had been watching too, even from a distance, made my chest ache with something beautiful and terrifying at once. My lips parted, but no words came. I didn't need to speak, my silence told him enough. He smiled again, softer this time, almost secretive, and then stood up, brushing sand from his hands. "I'll see you around," he said, voice carrying a promise hidden inside those 4 words. He walked back toward the tower, slow, unhurried, leaving me breathless and trembling in the sand. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs, my hands shaking as if I had been caught in a storm. I knew then that something irreversible had just started, something that couldn't be undone. The next few days became a rhythm I couldn't break. I woke up earlier, walked faster, carried the same nervous energy that made my chest feel light and heavy all at once. Each step toward the beach was filled with hope and fear tangled together, but every time I saw him up in the tower, sitting tall with the ocean behind him, that fear dissolved into something else, something magnetic. His presence drew me in before a single word was spoken, and even when the world around us was busy with families, kids, and swimmers, it felt like there was only him and me, an invisible line connecting us through the noise. I tried not to expect too much, but deep down, I wanted him to notice me again. I wanted him to come down those steps like he had before, and part of me ached at the thought that maybe he wouldn't. That morning, he didn't move for hours. He just sat in his tower, scanning the waves, blowing the whistle when needed, staying in his role, untouchable, professional. I sat below, restless, wondering if I had imagined everything between us. My mind went to dark places, whispering doubts. Maybe that moment yesterday meant nothing, maybe he was just being kind. But then, as the sun climbed higher, he stood up, stretched, and climbed down again. My pulse jumped, and I tried not to look too eager, though every nerve in my body screamed for his attention. He walked straight toward me, no hesitation this time, his eyes steady on mine, and when he stopped in front of me, I felt the sand sink beneath us like it recognized the weight of the moment. "Mind if I sit again?" he asked, though his body was already lowering onto the towel beside me. "You don't have to ask," I said before I could stop myself, my voice low, almost nervous. He chuckled softly, the sound warm, and leaned back as if this spot had always been his. We talked this time. Not surface words, not empty chatter, but real conversation that peeled back the layers. He told me about growing up near the water, how he felt more at home with waves than anywhere else, how lifeguarding wasn't just a summer job but a piece of who he was. His voice carried passion when he spoke about the ocean, like it was alive, like it was his oldest friend. And then he asked about me. For the first time, someone wasn't just looking at me but listening, holding on to each word as though it mattered. I told him little pieces, where I was from, what I loved, what scared me. He didn't judge. He didn't look away. He leaned closer, like every detail about me was a secret worth knowing. The sun grew hotter, the day busier, but I barely noticed because his presence drowned out everything else. At one point, a group of kids ran by, splashing sand over us, and I laughed nervously as I brushed it off. He didn't move away. Instead, he reached out, brushing a grain from my shoulder, his touch light but enough to set my skin on fire. It was such a small gesture, casual, but my entire body froze, heat rushing through me like a wave I couldn't fight. He must have seen the reaction in my face, because his lips curved into a smile that wasn't teasing but knowing. It made me feel exposed, yet safe at the same time. Hours passed before he finally stood up, shading his eyes from the sun. "I've got to head back," he said, nodding toward the tower. My chest tightened at the thought of him leaving, but before he walked away, he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You make this job less lonely." The words hit deeper than I expected, carrying honesty that stripped me bare. I couldn't respond. My lips parted, but the weight in my chest stole my voice. He gave me one last look before walking back, climbing the tower with the same confident steps, leaving me trembling in the sand. The rest of the day blurred. I swam, I read, I pretended to enjoy the beach like everyone else, but my mind kept replaying that sentence. "You make this job less lonely," it echoed in my head until it became something more than words. It was an opening, a crack in his armor, proof that I wasn't imagining what lived between us. He felt it too. And knowing that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Because now, I wasn't just a stranger who admired him from afar. I was part of his world, even if just a small part. And that meant the distance between us could only shrink, or explode. When I finally left the beach that evening, the sun bleeding into the horizon, I carried his words with me like a secret treasure. My chest ached with longing, but for the first time, it was mixed with hope, the kind that made every step home feel like the beginning of something bigger than I had ever allowed myself to dream. The next morning the sky was overcast, the kind of gray that made the sea restless and the air heavy with salt. I almost stayed home, convincing myself that maybe I should give him space, that maybe I was moving too fast into something undefined. But the pull was stronger than hesitation, and before I knew it, my feet were sinking into the cool sand again, eyes searching for the tower. He was there, as always, sitting upright, scanning the waves with that sharp attention that made him look untouchable, yet my heart knew better now. He had let me see behind the mask once, and I couldn't forget it. The beach was quieter that day, the stormy sky scaring off families and tourists, which made every step feel more intimate, like the space belonged only to us. I set my towel in the same spot, my chest buzzing with anticipation. For a long while he didn't move, didn't look down, just kept his eyes on the ocean as if he were testing me, waiting to see if I'd give up. I didn't. I stayed there, watching the horizon with him, pretending not to care, though every second stretched like an eternity. Finally, when the wind picked up and the waves grew rougher, he blew his whistle, shouted a warning to a group of reckless swimmers, and then descended the steps. This time he didn't walk slowly, didn't hesitate, he came straight toward me, his strides purposeful, as if the invisible thread between us had tightened. "Storm's rolling in," he said, dropping onto the towel beside me without asking. His hair was damp from the mist in the air, his voice rougher than usual. "Not the safest day to be out here." I smiled faintly, my nerves barely contained. "Then why are you here?" He looked at me, really looked, with an intensity that made my chest ache. "Because this is where I'm supposed to be." He paused, and his eyes flickered, softer now. "And maybe because I knew you'd come back." The words hit me harder than the wind whipping off the water. I swallowed, trying to process the weight of them, but my silence must have spoken enough. He leaned back, stretching his legs in the sand, close enough that our arms brushed. The touch was casual, but my body lit up like fire. We sat like that for a while, shoulders touching, the world around us growing smaller, swallowed by the crash of the waves. The silence wasn't empty, it was charged, thick with everything we weren't brave enough to say out loud yet. Eventually he broke it, his voice low, almost uncertain. You ever feel like you're living two lives? The one everyone sees, and the one you keep locked inside? The question made my heart stop. I turned to him, meeting his gaze, and in that moment, I saw it, his vulnerability, the piece of himself he rarely let anyone touch. I nodded slowly. Every single day. Something shifted between us then. His shoulders relaxed, his breath deepened, and it felt like a door had opened that neither of us could close. He told me how people saw him as confident, strong, the dependable lifeguard who could save anyone. But inside, he often felt trapped, carrying pieces of himself he couldn't share. His words were quiet, almost stolen by the wind, but I clung to them, every syllable carving into me. Because I understood. More than he could ever know, I understood. I wanted to reach out, to touch his hand, to let him know without words that he wasn't alone. But fear held me back. Instead, I whispered, "You don't have to hide with me." His head turned sharply, his eyes locking onto mine, searching, almost desperate, like he needed to believe I meant it. And I did. Every word was the most honest thing I had ever spoken. For a long moment, neither of us looked away. The wind picked up, scattering sand across the towel, the ocean roaring louder, but it all faded behind the intensity of his gaze. His lips parted slightly, like he wanted to say something, but instead he just breathed, a shaky exhale that betrayed the calm mask he wore. Finally, he stood, brushing sand from his palms, his movements slower, more deliberate than before. "I should get back to the tower," he said, but his voice carried weight, like he was leaving more behind than just words. As he walked away, I felt the echo of our conversation linger in the air, heavy and electric. I had seen him drop the shield, even if just for a moment, and in that moment, I knew we were standing on the edge of something neither of us could undo. It wasn't just glances anymore, or small smiles, it was the beginning of trust, fragile and real. And as the first drops of rain began to fall, cool against my heated skin, I realized that the storm outside wasn't half as powerful as the one unraveling inside me. The rain came hard the next day, thick drops pounding the sand and turning the shoreline into a blur of gray. Most people stayed away, the beach nearly empty, but I went anyway. Something inside me wouldn't let me stay home, even when logic told me no lifeguard would be sitting out in weather like this. Still, my heart pushed me forward, my shoes sinking into wet sand, the sky rumbling above. When the tower came into view, I stopped. He was there. Rain soaked his shirt, plastered his hair to his forehead, but he didn't move, didn't run for cover. He sat high, still scanning the water like someone might need saving, though the waves were too wild for anyone to dare. It was reckless, it was unnecessary, but it was him, steady, loyal, refusing to abandon his post. I hesitated, part of me wanting to leave, to give him the space of his duty, but then he saw me. Even from a distance, I felt it. His head turned, his eyes locked, and suddenly the storm wasn't just above us, it was between us. He climbed down, every step careful against the slick wood, and when his feet hit the sand, he came straight toward me. By the time he reached me, my clothes were drenched, hair dripping, but none of it mattered. He stopped so close that the warmth of his body was the only thing that cut through the chill. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, his voice raised over the roar of the waves, sharp at first but softening almost immediately. "It's dangerous." "Then why are you?" I shot back, my voice trembling more from nerves than cold. His jaw tightened, rain running down his face, his eyes burning with something I hadn't seen before. "Because this is where I belong. Because I can't leave it behind." His voice dropped, almost drowned by the storm. "And maybe, because I was hoping you'd show up." Those words cut through me harder than the rain, leaving me raw and exposed. My chest ached, my hands shook, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. I wanted to answer, but no words came. Instead, I just looked at him, praying my eyes said what my lips couldn't. He seemed to understand. His hand lifted slowly, hesitantly, like he was fighting himself, before brushing against mine. The contact was so small, but it sent fire through my body, heat against the cold rain, something so alive it made the storm feel irrelevant. We stood there for what felt like forever, the world around us dissolving into nothing but water and sound. Finally, he pulled his hand back, not because he wanted to, but because fear still lingered in the space between us. He turned slightly, his shoulders tense, as if battling something inside himself. "You make this harder than it already is," he muttered, almost too quietly, as though the confession slipped past his guard. I wanted to reach for him, to hold him there, to tell him he wasn't alone in whatever weight he carried. But before I could, he shook his head and stepped back, creating distance where there had been none. His eyes softened, apology hidden in them, but his body was already pulling away. "Go home," he said, though his voice cracked like the command wasn't for me but for himself. Then he turned, walking back through the rain toward the tower, climbing into his solitude once again. I stood frozen, rain dripping down my face, mixing with the sting of emotions I couldn't name. He had opened the door wider this time, given me a glimpse of the struggle inside him, but just as quickly, he had closed it again. And yet, even in the rejection, even in the distance, there was something undeniable. He cared. He felt it too, even if he wasn't ready to admit it. That thought kept me rooted to the sand until the storm grew colder, harsher, forcing me to finally walk away. When I reached home, shivering and exhausted, I replayed every word, every look, every touch. His hand against mine. His voice breaking. The truth he was too afraid to say. It all spun in my head, tangled and overwhelming. But beneath the confusion, beneath the ache, there was a flame. Small, flickering, but alive. And I knew no storm, no silence, no fear could put it out now. The storm passed by the next morning, leaving the air sharp and clean, the sand damp but glittering under the sunlight. The beach looked different, calmer, almost fragile, as though the chaos from the day before had left its mark. I didn't even think twice before heading there. My body pulled like gravity itself was dragging me back to that tower. My heart was restless, beating unevenly, replaying every moment of the storm, the way his hand had brushed against mine, the way his voice cracked when he told me to go home. It wasn't rejection. It wasn't indifference. It was fear, the kind that came from wanting something too much but not knowing if you were allowed to reach for it. That thought carried me until my feet touched the sand again. He was there, already perched high on the tower, his posture perfect as always, but something was different. His gaze was heavier, slower, almost distracted, as though his mind wasn't on the water but somewhere else entirely. For the first time, I didn't hesitate. I spread my towel in the same place, sat down, and looked straight at him. No stolen glances this time, no pretending I wasn't aware of him. I wanted him to see me, wanted him to know I wasn't going anywhere. When his eyes finally met mine, the tension between us thickened. He didn't look away. He didn't hide behind duty. For long minutes, we just stared, two people locked in a silent war neither of us wanted to end. Eventually, he climbed down. His steps were slower today, less confident, like he was wrestling with himself. When he reached me, he didn't ask if he could sit. He just did, dropping into the sand this time, closer than before, so close our knees almost touched. The silence that followed was suffocating and alive all at once. His breathing was heavier than usual, his hands digging into the wet sand as if grounding himself. "You came back," he said finally, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I told you I would," I replied softly, surprising myself with how steady my words sounded despite the storm inside me. He let out a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You don't make things easy for me, you know that?" His eyes flickered toward the ocean, then back to me. "Every time I think I can keep it simple, you show up, and everything I've tried to bury comes rushing back." His confession hit me harder than I expected. My throat tightened, my heart pounding so loudly I wondered if he could hear it. "Maybe you don't have to bury it," I whispered. He turned to me then, his eyes raw, filled with a mix of fear and longing that made my chest ache. For a moment, he looked like he might speak, like the words were right there on his lips. Instead, he shook his head and ran a hand through his damp hair. "You don't understand. People see me as someone solid, unshakable. If they knew," he trailed off, swallowing hard, his jaw tense. "If they knew what I really wanted, who I really am, everything would change." The vulnerability in his voice was almost unbearable. I wanted to reach for him, to hold him, to erase every ounce of doubt weighing him down. "You don't have to be who they think you are," I said softly, the words trembling with truth. "You just have to be you." For a second, the wall between us cracked. He leaned closer, so close I could see the flecks of color in his eyes, feel the heat of his breath mixing with mine. My heart raced, my body frozen in anticipation. But just when I thought the distance would finally close, he pulled back sharply, his hands balling into fists in the sand. His face twisted with frustration, like he was angry at himself for even getting that close. "You don't know what you're asking of me," he said, his voice rough, breaking under the weight of emotions he couldn't hold back anymore. "I built my whole life on control, on keeping this locked inside. And now," he stopped, shaking his head. "Now you sit here, and I can't stop thinking about you. Every damn second." The words hung between us, heavy, dangerous, but alive. I couldn't stop myself anymore. I reached out, my hand brushing against his clenched fist, a silent plea for him to let go. He didn't move, didn't pull away, but his whole body trembled with tension. The storm outside might have passed, but the one inside him was raging stronger than ever. We sat like that, caught between fear and desire, silence and truth, until finally he exhaled a shaky breath and looked at me with eyes that stripped me bare. "You scare me," he admitted, his voice so soft I almost didn't hear it. "Because with you, I don't feel like I can hide anymore." And in that single confession, I knew we had crossed a line. There was no going back. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of stolen looks, unspoken words, and a tension so thick it hung in the air every time I stepped onto the beach. I came because I couldn't stay away, and he stayed because he was bound to that tower, but between us something was shifting, something neither of us could bury anymore. Each morning I found him watching me before I even looked up, his gaze softer now, less guarded, like he had given up pretending he didn't care. And yet, the distance was still there, the weight of fear pressing down on both of us. One evening, when the crowds had thinned and the sky was painted with streaks of gold, he finally left the tower early. I was gathering my things when I saw him walking across the sand toward me, his shadow stretching long in the setting sun. There was a determination in his steps this time, like he had made a decision that cost him sleep and peace. When he stopped in front of me, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, I felt the world shrink until it was just him and me. "The ocean our only witness, walk with me," he said simply. His tone wasn't a request. It was quiet but certain, and I followed without hesitation. We walked along the shoreline, the water lapping at our feet, the air cool and damp with the evening breeze. For a long while he said nothing, just kept his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his eyes fixed on the horizon. I stayed close but silent, waiting, knowing something was building inside him. Finally, he stopped, staring out at the endless sea. "I've been lying to myself for years," he said, his voice low, almost broken. "And when you showed up, I couldn't do it anymore. You tore the mask right off without even trying." My chest tightened, my throat dry. "I didn't mean to." "You did," he cut in gently, turning to me. "But it's not a bad thing. It's just terrifying." His eyes glistened in the fading light, his voice cracking with the weight of his truth. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to spend your whole life hiding? To smile, to laugh, to play the part everyone wants from you, while inside you're suffocating?" I swallowed hard, tears stinging my own eyes. "Yes," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I know exactly what that feels like." He stared at me then, and something inside him broke open. The wall he had fought so hard to keep standing crumbled, and the raw, unguarded version of him stood before me. He reached out slowly, hesitantly, and when his fingers brushed against mine, this time he didn't pull away. He let them stay, our hands trembling but locked together, the electricity between us undeniable. "I don't know what this means," he admitted, his voice almost pleading. "I don't know what comes next. But when I'm with you, it's the only time I feel like I can breathe." The confession struck deep, shaking me to my core. I squeezed his hand, the words spilling out of me before I could stop them. "Then don't let go. Don't run from it. Just let yourself feel it." His eyes closed briefly, his jaw tightening as though he was fighting every instinct to retreat, but when he opened them again, I saw it, the surrender. Slowly, carefully, he stepped closer until his forehead rested against mine, his breath mingling with mine, warm and unsteady. The world fell silent, the waves fading into the background as the air between us thickened with something undeniable, fragile, and real. I didn't move, didn't rush. I just let the moment hold us, two people standing in the ruins of their fear, finally daring to reach for what they had both craved all along. When he finally pulled back, it wasn't with distance but with a softness I hadn't seen before. His thumb brushed over the back of my hand, his voice barely a whisper. "You scare me because you make me want more than I ever thought I could have." I looked into his eyes, steady now, no longer afraid of my own truth. "And you make me believe I deserve it." The night wrapped around us, the stars beginning to pierce the darkening sky, but neither of us moved. We stood there, hand in hand, hearts exposed, knowing the world outside could never understand what was unfolding between us. but for the first time, neither of us cared. The night after we walked the shoreline together, I couldn't sleep. My body was still humming with the electricity of his hand in mine, the quiet weight of his forehead resting against me, the trembling words he had finally let slip into the open. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had seen someone bare their soul without disguise, and for the first time I had bared mine too. The world outside was silent, but inside me, everything was loud, my heartbeat, my doubts, my hope. By morning, I already knew where I needed to be. The beach was almost empty when I arrived, the early sun soft and golden. The tide was low, the air calm, and yet my nerves felt heavier than any storm we had stood under. I saw him at the tower, sitting the same way he always had, tall, focused, the picture of control. But something in his posture was different now. He wasn't just watching the ocean. He was watching for me. And when his eyes found mine, he didn't look away, didn't pretend it was a coincidence. He climbed down almost immediately, his steps quick, purposeful, like he had already decided what needed to be said. When he reached me, he didn't sit right away. He stood there for a moment, his hands flexing at his sides, his chest rising and falling like he was bracing for a leap. "I couldn't stop thinking about last night," he said, his voice low but firm. "Neither could I admitted, my throat dry, my words shaky but true. He finally lowered himself into the sand beside me, closer than ever before, his knee brushing mine. "I've been hiding for so long," he continued, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Convincing myself that if I ignored this part of me, it would disappear. But it hasn't. It's only grown louder. And then you came, and suddenly the life I've been pretending to live feels unbearable." I didn't speak. I just let him pour out what he had locked inside. His voice shook as he went on, each word carrying years of fear. "I'm terrified of what people will say, terrified of losing the image everyone has of me. But I'm even more terrified of losing this." He turned to me then, his eyes burning with a fragile honesty, "of losing you before I even have the chance to really know what we could be." The air left my lungs. My chest felt too full, my heart too raw. I reached out, placing my hand over his, steady this time, no hesitation. "You won't lose me," I said softly, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Not unless you push me away. I'm here. I've been here. And I don't want to go anywhere." He closed his eyes, exhaling a shaky breath, his fingers finally lacing with mine, tight, as though letting go would mean drowning. For a long while, we just sat like that, the silence filled not with fear but with something new, something whole. The beach stretched quiet around us, the ocean steady and endless, but between us, it felt like the world was just beginning. He leaned closer then, so close I could feel the warmth of his breath, the hesitation trembling in his lips. And when his mouth finally met mine, it wasn't rushed, it wasn't desperate, it was gentle, searching, like he was learning what it meant to be free for the first time. The kiss was soft but heavy with everything we had been holding back, and when it broke, his forehead rested against mine again, only this time without fear. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "But I want to try. With you." My chest ached with something I couldn't name, something bigger than words. "We'll figure it out," I whispered back. "Together." The sun climbed higher, the beach slowly filling with life again, but for us, nothing else mattered. The tower stood behind him, the ocean stretched endlessly before us, and for the first time, neither of us felt alone. We weren't just lifeguard and stranger anymore. We were two souls who had found each other in the most unexpected place, breaking through fear, breaking through silence, and choosing something real. And as he held my hand tighter, refusing to let go, I realized that what had started as a glance from a tower had become something that would change both of our lives forever.